If you look at the Russians are losing 5 times as many soldiers a month as the Ukrainians are. And the Ukraine is a smaller country and a smaller army for that matter. Although the Ukrainian armed forces are the strongest, most powerful armed forces in all of Europe, just to be clear, right now.
So that was U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stating that, as far as he's concerned, from his information, Russian losses are 5 times Ukrainian losses currently in the Russo-Ukrainian war. And that is, if even remotely true, which I have no reason to believe it isn't, since this current White House administration hasn't been particularly supportive of Ukraine and bolstering Ukraine's position. They don't currently supply any aid to Ukraine. The U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance stated it was the thing he's most proud of. So if the U.S. administration is now saying that the losses are 5-1, 5 times more Russian losses than Ukrainian losses on the front lines, that is a big change from what previously was believed to be the case, which put it around 2.5 or 3-1 more Russian losses than Ukrainian, which was questionable about this war of attrition, which we have seen since 2023 in the Russo-Ukrainian war. So the main Russian narrative has been Russia big, Ukraine small. Russia has more resources, they will eventually win this war by crushing Ukraine. But as I've been pointing out on this channel, my other channel, since probably around mid-2023, Russia in second half of 2025 is going to hit 3 main crises: manpower, money, and materiel. So this is the part of the manpower issue. Russia, for the first time since 2023, the Ukrainians claim, is now losing more soldiers than they can recruit. And if the losses are 5-1, that indicates that, look at the population differences for rough measure between Russia and Ukraine. Before the invasion, it's like 3-1. Even we say that Ukraine has lost a bit of its male military age population, then maybe at most it's going to be 4-1, plus the Russians haven't gone for a second mobilization yet. You can see which way this is going over the long term. It means that Russia is just basically going to run out of the ability to recruit enough manpower into its army compared to Ukraine. Now, I obviously don't want to see it go to the very end and see just the two populations completely annihilate each other. But in terms of the narrative that Putin has been selling, this train wreck of an invasion, that is a huge blow to the sustainability from the Russian side. If they are also struggling with recruitment, it is becoming harder and harder to incentivize Russians to sign up for the military, which is why we've been expecting a new Russian mobilization for quite a while at this point in order to plug that hole. But if it's going to stay at 5-1 in terms of loss ratio compared to Ukraine, then second mobilization isn't going to solve the problem. And that is what the Russian ultranationalist Igor Girkin said a few weeks ago. He said it's too late. Putin blew it. He should have gone for mobilization back in 2023, but he didn't. He went for this alternative method of just paying a lot of money. Now the Russian economy is in huge trouble. They can fudge the numbers anyway if they want with clever accounting, but Russia's been in a recession since the second half of last year. Their official figures are going to say that it's basically stagnant, but in reality it is in huge trouble. The war economy is crowding out the normal economy. They have high interest rates. They're not really able to borrow money. Their GDP to debt ratio isn't super high, but the thing is they can't borrow the money cheaply on the markets, so they're having to burn through a lot of their reserves in order to keep the economy going. And they have a massive cost of living crisis, inflation is high, and they don't have any real good options at this point economically without having to go into some sort of austerity. They could print lots of money, but it'll just make the inflation obviously go through the roof. On top of that, recruitment, big issue. Putin can still go for this mobilization, will be extremely unpopular. On top of the economy doing bad, no light at the end of the tunnel in terms of achieving the strategic objectives as laid out by Vladimir Putin a few days before he launched this extended invasion in February 2022. And in terms of materiel, Ukraine is now ahead of the Russian Federation in terms of the drone war. Yes, Russia still has more, probably rockets that can get through, and the Ukrainians can't shoot them all down, and the amount of material that Russia has is still more, but they have basically burnt through their Soviet era stockpiles for all intents and purposes, and they are not evolving and developing enough new Wunderwaffe or some sort of big breakthrough that allows them to overcome that. So Russia, as I predicted a few years ago, has basically come to a crunch point with these three issues, and this statement by Marco Rubio just re-emphasizes the trajectory that Russia is on, which is certainly not to win, although I called that after 3 weeks of this invasion on my other channel. They are looking like a choice between some sort of prolonged stalemate by freezing the front lines. Maybe in a few years they could plot and rebuild and come back and attack Ukraine again and eventually win, or they may be, the country may unravel and collapse in the meantime, or they're on their path to a full and utter defeat in the Russo-Ukrainian war. Those are the two options, not just me saying it, it's also Igor Girkin saying it. Those are the two options. He is someone who doesn't love Ukraine whatsoever. He's a Russian ultranationalist. He was part of the invasions in 2014. He's sitting in a prison in Russia because he dares to speak against Vladimir Putin in terms of the strategy, and apparently he's still got enough support behind him that he's still alive while he's in prison. We'll see how that develops for him in due course. But this is why you see Vladimir Putin under increasing strain amongst the elite in Moscow, because we saw further oppression and clampdowns in terms of the internet and social media, and there was a little bit of pushback from a lot of people who are not politically active because it was intervening in their daily lives. The Russian state under Putin is starting to creak a little bit. Doesn't mean that tomorrow he's about to the regime will collapse or that the Russian forces will collapse. However, they are on that path, and the big conundrum that Vladimir Putin faces is that if he stops the fighting now without a major strategic achievement since 2022, what has he actually gained? He gained a land bridge to Crimea. Well, they actually have a physical bridge in the first place, but okay, but they destroyed lots of these towns that no one frankly in Russia gives two hoots about, and it came at a huge cost in terms of treasure and lives and Russia's international reputation, and that's all they got for it. And then he stops the fighting. Not great for a strong man if you don't look particularly strong, and that is the dilemma. He can stop the war, but that increases the chances that he may actually be replaced and lose power himself as a result of not having achieved the outlined strategic objectives of this war. He could have just called it quits after a few weeks and probably gotten away with it, but now that he's let it go on for over 4 years since then, it's becoming harder and harder, and he has the incentive to keep going because there's always a chance, as remote as it is, that he can turn things around and somehow win. But by doing that, he's just digging himself a bigger and bigger hole, and for the Russian Federation, probably sowing the seeds of its demise if you just bring it to its logical conclusion when you see them involved in an imperial war of aggression facing 5-1 losses. Why is it turned around from what was believed to be about 2.5 or 3-1 ratio? The advances in drone warfare. We've also seen Starlink cut off for the Russian forces in the last few months, and you can see it on the frontline map reports that Russia's advances, while they are really creeping forward, they are just a fraction of what they were previously. The current estimate to capture all of Donbass has gone from like about 3 years to like well over a decade at this point, so it's really not sustainable at the current pace. So unless he gets some sort of unforeseen technological strategic breakthrough, a black swan event here in Ukraine that leads to somehow a collapse of the country, he is heading one way, and that one way is out of power. I'll leave you on that note from a pretty nice Odessa Mama. It's a pleasant evening here. The weather had changed. It got a bit wet over the last 2 days, why I didn't make any content for this channel, but we are looking forward to summer coming in full blast of heat pretty soon, so looking forward to that. If you are happen to be coming here to Ukraine, I have my guide down below with a lot of, amongst other things, my hospitality guide from my favorite cafes, restaurants, clubs, bars, shisha lounges for here in cities like Odessa, Kyiv, Lviv, Uzhhorod and Chernovtsi. Slava Ukraini! до перемоги.